Hey guys, this is Gajili here, um, and I thought maybe I should do a little video tutorial for you guys on some of my recent discoveries about backgrounds. And I'd like to preface this by saying in no way am I an expert at this. I'm still learning about it myself. But here's some basic things that I've learned about backgrounds. So, one, just remember that you have your foreground, which is usually your subject or your character, and that's, what you see at the very front, like this. And then you have your middle ground, which is like, say, a tree right here, and a rock here, and then you have your background, which I refer to pretty much all of this as a background, even though, obviously there are extra parts to it, but the background would be like, say, the mountains in the distance, and then more trees back here, maybe a few buildings, like a house or something like that. And yeah, this is obviously very rough. So you have your character in the front right here, and they are the foreground. And then, all this stuff is to create the atmosphere. Yeah, this tree is kind of oddly placed, but it's just an example just to show you sort of what it is like. So okay, that's your, the main things, the basics. You have your foreground, your middle ground, and your background. And like I made a post earlier about how it's not about the detail, it's more about the atmosphere that you create. And I think we all really judge ourselves super harshly on backgrounds. Backgrounds are really hard. So here's something else I've learned. All right, so cityscapes and urban settings. In settings like this, you have to remember that pretty much everything is a geometric shape. Generally, I just used one-point perspective, so you know what that means, that there's a vanishing point right here, and all of this stuff, it falls along these lines to meet in the vanishing point. So obviously this is not a finished landscape by any means, but just the general idea. So what you have to remember with cityscapes and urban settings is that there are lots of geometric shapes. So you know how when you were in geometry and everyone's like, oh, you can draw a cube or something, and you're like, oh, okay. That's where this really comes into play. Remember your geometric shapes. You have your cubes, your spheres, and with spheres it's all about the shading, It doesn't look round and three-dimensional unless you add shading. And you gotta remember, this one comes in, handy for houses and things, your triangular prisms. And you just remember that, like, pull up your perspective again, you just put your shapes to follow your perspective lines. So say that this is the roof, it goes straight back from this, and the bottom of the prism would end right there, and it goes straight back. So then you would add another building to this side of it. Say that one's a square, and yeah. So they all go towards the vanishing point. And since this is above the vanishing point, you need to have it, you'd see the roof of it since it's above it. Well, I'm pretty bad at perspective, but let's see. Okay. It's like flatter, if you understand what I mean. So kind of see the flat as it bends toward the landscape. And then something else you have to remember is that you can combine shapes to be all sorts of things. So say you want to make a cube, you follow your perspective. You create your cube. Say you want it to go back like that, but then you want another cube on top of it with a triangular prism, and see, that looks more like a house or a shop or something, just because you've combined shapes together. And then I try to always sort of gesturally create a perspective background, or not background, ground, so that you can just sort of follow it with your eyes, how things are supposed to fall. Obviously this isn't a finished background, but so there's, for cityscapes, remember, just lots of geometric shapes. I have ugly handwriting with my tablet, sorry about that. Anyway, and for scenery and landscapes and things like that, you have to remember organic shapes. That's another thing that really drove home to me in the art classes that I've actually had, is that the real world, like scenery, things that are natural, they're not going to be perfectly geometric. Sometimes spheres and things like that occur in nature, but rarely. So, say this is a rock, it's got its jagged edges and everything, but by no means is it a perfect geometric shape. I think with rocks you can just sort of wing it and create different places where there would be like a divot in or whatever, and just create varying tones, and then there's your rock. And then with trees, there's all kinds of different trees in the world, but they generally all have a trunk which is wider than their branches, and you can just sort of play around with branches, you know, however you want to. It's a little weird, but you know, and then they just sort of have little things that connect. But the point is that none of this is completely geometric, and you can just sort of create whatever you want. And that's why I prefer drawing scenery to cityscapes, because it's way less meticulous and detailed. You can just, well, I mean, it's not necessarily less detailed, but it's detail that you don't have to be perfect at perspective to understand. But yeah, from what I've noticed, most people don't even care if you get perspective slightly wrong, so, you know, whatever. It's not even a big deal. But see, when you start combining these things, like, where would the vanishing point for this be? This is just, let me move it up. That way the vanishing point's higher, because that makes the horizon here now, and it's above, or it's in the top third of the page. So the vanishing point would be right there in the center, generally, but you can offset it if you want to, but then things would have to move towards the vanishing point. But, you know, for backgrounds, what you have to do is you have to combine your geometric and your organic. So here's like a tint, and it's along the vanishing point. You know, follow it towards the vanishing point, which is right here. And so you just keep adding stuff. It doesn't have to be perfect. Obviously, this isn't perfect by any means. It's just, you know, the bare bones of something. But with these tricks and tips, you can just sort of create an atmosphere. So you have this as your background. Well, this is your middle ground right here, and that's your background right there. This one doesn't really have a foreground because I haven't put anything on it yet, but you could probably put a silhouette of a person here, and since the horizon line is above, let's see, let's say this tree is about 8 feet tall. So then you, if your character is like 5 feet tall, so let's split this up into 8 parts. So if your person's like 5 feet, not that I can see those lines I made, but anyway, 1, 2, 3, 6. So say they're standing right here, and that's So they would be about this tall. My head's a bit big. So now your character fits into the scene a little bit better. And as long as you're kind of following the vanishing point, which would be, directly behind the character. If you follow the vanishing point, you can project how tall they would be if they were, say, up here. So like say they're standing right here facing this person back here, but they're about the same height. So this person might be a little bit taller. But yeah, that's how you fit your characters into a scene. You create your base elements. I'm not sure what would be here, just like bushes and a tree maybe, and stuff like that. And then you have your basic background. You kind of are starting to understand what this scene would look like. And then, obviously you have your mountains in the background, because pretty much wherever you are on Earth, there are mountains in the background. But yeah, so you've created your scene, and let's see, trying to put it all together cohesively, but that's kind of evading me, because backgrounds are difficult. That's the truth. They're really hard. But I think once you learn that you can be a little freer with it and just, break everything down to its basest elements, then it becomes a lot easier. That's the vanishing point. And it gets more complicated when you realize that things can have multiple vanishing points. But I'm not going to go into that in this video because that would just take forever. But basically, if you have multiple vanishing points, let's say this one, I'm just going to show you with a cube because it'll be quicker that way. Say this is your multiple vanishing points. So that side goes that way, and then see how it's bent in two directions. This happens a lot in everyday life. Most of the time when I'm drawing this kind of perspective, it's on books that are sitting on a desk or something. It's not usually the entire scene that's skewed this way, because most of the time things aren't set perfectly in line with one another. So as long as you keep in mind that there are two separate vanishing points, you can put things on any place in here and it would still make logical sense. No, that's not what I was trying to do. But say there's a cylinder here and it follows this vanishing point because it's behind the book. But if it's a little bit in front of it, it has to reach the vanishing point at a different angle. So just keep in mind that you have two vanishing points and you should be able to create basically anything from them. Anyway, this is just a conglomeration of shapes. But anyway, that's basically how to do vanishing point. So other than that, this was just a quick tutorial on the things I've figured out about background. So hope you enjoyed it, and good luck.